Welcome to the Doctors Manitoba Vaccine Town Hall for Steinbach and communities across Southeastern Manitoba. I am your host for this evening. I'm Michelle Sawatzky. I co-host the morning show on AM 1250 radio. I decided to sit in my familiar surroundings here at the studio in Steinbach, and I've been on the air for 24 years at Golden West and have loved this community every minute. Grew up in Steinbach, and I'm very proud to be back living here, raised my family here, or still am, I guess. I have twin boys that are 18, and really am honored to have been asked and trusted to host tonight. Also trusted to bring your questions to the doctors that we have trusted long before COVID ever became something we talked about. And, there's so much information circulating right now about the vaccines, and some of it seems to change with time. And there are a lot of great questions coming in tonight. But as I reviewed them, in some of the questions, I can feel almost the fists clenching, and our shoulders go up. And this topic can make us feel like that. I am like you. I think that's why it's fitting that I'm asking the questions, because I'm not a doctor and I want to know. And I got my first vaccination. I'm waiting for my second one. And I've talked to the doctors that I trust to get the information I need. So I hope that you are coming tonight with an open mind, with open hands. Let's unclench and let's be together on this. And I think that's why I so appreciate these doctors taking their time. And please don't forget that the doctors answering your questions tonight are the same ones that have given up family time for their whole careers to be on call, to meet us at the emergency room when we need them the very most. And they're here to do their very best and to help us with the knowledge that they have that we don't. And I think that's what I appreciate about tonight. Now, before we begin, on behalf of the physicians participating tonight and Doctors Manitoba, I would like to acknowledge that medical services across Manitoba are located on the original lands of First Nations and Inuit peoples and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. I was chatting with a Métis friend just yesterday, and I asked her if words like this really meant something to them. And she said, you know what, in this time especially, us saying those words seems to mean more and more, and we're having those conversations. And we do respect that First Nations treaties were made on these territories, acknowledge harms and mistakes, and we dedicate ourselves to collaborate in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in the spirit of reconciliation. All right. You can see them now. I would like to introduce our panel and invite each physician that's with us tonight to say a few words about what they do and why they are here tonight. So first, Dr. Curtis Krahn, welcome.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here. I haven't been in Steinbach quite as long as you have, but I've spent 37 years working the trenches through the emergency, obstetrics, the wards. Now I'm primarily doing clinic care. I'm doing a little bit of hospital work. I do some chemotherapy, and I love this community. And I want to be here sharing information and just having a chat about something which is very, very important to me.
Absolutely. And a co-founder of Steinbach Family Medical Centre as well. So people should know that you've been here really since the beginning of some big stuff for Steinbach. So 37 years, I haven't been here that much longer than that, Curtis, come on. Okay, next, Dr. Chris Burnett, welcome.
Thank you, thanks very much. It's a privilege and an honor to be here tonight. When I was asked to come on board for this, I really realized that what I'm doing this evening is really what most of us are doing during our clinics at the moment, is speaking to people who are anxious, a little bit frightened, a little bit confused, and just being able to give them information to help them make a choice themselves for this. So I think I welcome this opportunity just to do the same on a wider field, although I can't really see all the faces out there. I'm a family doc, moved to Niverville about 15 years ago, and we started a clinic here. It's now a community-owned clinic, and I'm still working there. And I'm always rural. I'm a farmer's son, and I get anxious when there's more than 4 roads meeting. So,
well, we're happy to have you in rural Manitoba still, so that's awesome. Also, something about farmers turning into doctors. We've got Dr. Jayson Barkman with us. Go ahead, Jayson.
Of course, I didn't turn off my mute button. I apologize. Thanks, Michelle. I grew up in a small farm, kind of between Steinbach and St. Anne. And I think actually Michelle's brother was my volleyball coach as I moved to Steinbach later on after I went to Blumenort School. So I ended up going to Winnipeg for medical school and going to Calgary for part of my residency and end up coming back to Steinbach, and been working here, I think 14 years now. So it's been good. I have anesthesia training as well, so I do a little bit more of the critical care. I do some family medicine, but I work up in Thompson occasionally and do critical, and I'm often the ones that get called if a patient gets really sick and they need intubation. So I have a little perspective on that, as well as I do some family medicine and emergency medicine as well.
Fantastic. And finally, Dr. José Francois.
Hi, everyone. I grew up just down the road from Jayson, halfway between St. Anne and Giroux. So thank you for the invitation. I'm a family doctor in Winnipeg, work also in acute care and in long-term care. And I have the pleasure of being the specialty lead for family medicine for the province at Shared Health.
Fantastic. Gives you a real provincial view too, which I think we will really value tonight. So thank you to Doctors Manitoba for planning tonight's town hall. This is the last of 4 town halls on the vaccine that they have planned for this week. And if you have family or friends that missed tonight's session, they'll be able to view it on demand. Details will be posted at manitobavaccine.ca. You'll hear that a few times tonight. So now we would like to move right into answering your questions. We received a lot of questions in advance through manitobavaccine.ca. We'll also be watching for questions in the YouTube chat. So please do feel free to ask questions or raise concerns in the YouTube chat. That's why we're here. So please do feel free to do that. We will do our best to get through as many questions as we can in the hour we have tonight. Now, if we do not get to your question, don't worry, a panel of physicians, and this was something I learned through this, there's a panel of physicians that is continuing to add more answers to common questions at manitobavaccine.ca, which is also valuable time that our doctors are putting in. So that's much appreciated. So there we go. All right, well, let's get right to the first question, you guys. And Dr. Krahn, I'll direct this first one to you. There are several questions about whether or not COVID-19 is really that serious. And I'll be honest, some of us haven't really seen it in our circles. For example, in the question, hasn't this virus proven to be only as deadly as the annual flu and only be an issue if you are over 70 or have pre-existing conditions?
Well, I think it's a very important question. And I'm glad so many people have answered it or have asked it, because I've been asked this question over and over again in the clinic. Like, are we making a big fuss about nothing here? And I have to be honest and say that in January and February of 2020, when we were first hearing news of this, I thought this might just be a big bust as well. We got through the first wave in Manitoba, had very few deaths, mainly people who had been traveling overseas. But then we got hit with November, and November, the second wave hit. And most of you can recall that Steinbach probably was hit as hard as anywhere in Canada. And I started seeing my patients dropping off the map. I would get the report of my patient showing up in the emergency department. 2 days later, I'd get the report from the ICU. And a few weeks later, I'd get their death summary. And so as December rolled on, I ended up having, I counted, I was watching the obituaries, and I ended up seeing 12 of my patients die in the second wave. And those were people that I knew. They were people in the community. These were not personal care home residents. These were people that I had been treating. I had treated some of their cancers and their heart disease, and then they went and died of COVID. And it was a very, very sad and somber time for me. The third wave came, and I only lost 2 patients there. But yeah, is it serious? It is very serious. And the only reason it's not far more serious than it has been is because the government has had restrictions. The only tools we really had to fight this pandemic were restrictions, lockdown, masks, all of those sorts of things. And I think the government used them very effectively. So in Canada, I was just looking at this a few minutes ago. In Canada, we ended up with 26,000 deaths. The United States has gone up to 610,000 deaths. But if you look at that and you wonder what would have been like if we hadn't had the restrictions, well, the United States did not have the same sort of restrictions that we had. And their death rate was about 2.5 times what ours was. So I really think that those public safety measures had a big effect. If you look at a place where the restrictions were much more lax, like Peru, and they just did a recount of all of their deaths, and they ended up having a death rate 8 times what Canada's was. So there are countries in the world that are doing much worse than we are. And we can just be very thankful that we've had good public safety measures in place. So is this like the flu? No, this is not even close to the flu, because I've dealt with flu for 37 years. The people that I see dying of flu, and there might be 2,000 to 8,000 deaths a year from flu in Canada per year. And that is without any restrictions. We would have had huge numbers. There were some estimates that we could see as many as 200,000 deaths in Canada if we didn't have these restrictions. I don't know what the real number is. I just know it would have been huge. The flu never does anything like that. So is this serious? Yeah, I think we have to take it very seriously. But we also have to remember not just the deaths, because we look at the deaths and we say, well, that was a grandma, that was, they were older, they had comorbidities. But we're seeing a lot of young people that actually have lifelong, well, we don't know if they're going to be lifelong, but they have lungs that are damaged. And some of those lungs, I think, are damaged permanently. So we have a lot of people who are walking around with post-COVID syndrome, long COVID. And it's a very serious disease for them. So yeah, so in answer to the question, I, as a physician, it's dear to my heart. I think this is an enormously serious problem.
Dr. Francois, to follow up on that, the question is the government exaggerating COVID's impact? And Dr. Krahn talked to sort of the numbers of those dying from COVID, but compared to mortality other years, is the government exaggerating it? Speak to that.
So I think the government's been fairly transparent in terms of the numbers. We get those numbers pretty well every day. Statistics Canada actually looked at were there more deaths last year than usual, and COVID did bump up our death rate by 5% in Canada. So fairly significant number. In Manitoba, we lost over 1,100 people so far in this pandemic. Compared to an average year for flu, that's 40 or 50 cases on a year where we have an influenza. Seasonal influenza. So it's significantly different. It certainly had an impact on our acute care or hospital beds. We still have about 200 people sitting in medical beds with COVID or recovering, and over 50 or so in ICUs right now in the province. And we're it's nice to see that we're going on a downward trend, which is great, probably due to our measures and our vaccination efforts, I think. But it certainly had an impact, and not only in terms of medical issues. All of those patients in hospital require a lot of attention, and it's pulled a lot of our staff that normally deal with other issues, so surgery. So we have now created a backlog of surgical procedures, and we don't really count those in COVID. So if people didn't get their colonoscopy or they didn't get their cardiac surgery and have a bad outcome, those aren't necessarily captured in our COVID numbers. So the impact may be far larger than we think.
Okay. Dr. Barkman, I'm going to get you to take the next 2 questions. How effective are the vaccines against COVID-19? And what percentage of people in hospital with COVID-19 are not vaccinated?
Oh boy, I'm going to have this all evening. I forget to turn off my mute. Sorry. You've thrown me off too. Thank you for the question. I'm the youngest on the panel. I should know how to use technology. So fortunately, as most people are aware, there's been a lot of vaccines. I heard up to 100 developed throughout the world. So I'll just focus on the ones that are relevant to us in our province. So the two that we are mostly giving now, the Pfizer as well as the Moderna, have been shown to be very effective, fortunately, and over 90% effective, both in the trials and real world data that we've been following up with. So it's very encouraging. AstraZeneca, that we don't use as much now, as most people know, was shown to be 65% effective, but in real world, as far as preventing serious illness and hospitalization, it was more effective than they initially advertised. So quite promising. And if you look at the real world stuff, as we get more vaccinations, you can kind of see across our country, the cases are falling. And it seems to be, and sometimes you might say that's coincidence, but it seems to be consistent in other communities when you look at people that are ahead of us, such as Israel and the UK as well. So it seems to be both in the studies that we have and the real world data, it works really well. And the follow-up question, I think, was how many people are getting hospitalized, right?
That are what percentage of people are not vaccinated that are in hospital?
Yeah, so I did look this up, and apparently there's been only 3 people in Manitoba so far that have been admitted to ICU that have not, are fully vaccinated. So of those 3, I mean, that's, some people follow stats, but we often will have 70, sometimes upward, more than that. Some people we've sent out of province for ICU care. So of 3 total, and so at any given time we have 70 to 90, depends on the day. So if you take that all into account, I mean, that's a very small percentage. And I'm not even 100% sure if those people were, like, you're supposed to wait 2 weeks after your last vaccine. So I don't know that data, but even still, if that was true, that would still be a very small percentage. And, you sometimes see these numbers and you see them online. And I think Alberta's posted some good numbers if you want to look that up. But, just my real world experience, I end up being the one that intubates. And, in the last 2-3 weeks, I've been involved with care where people have been to ICU. And, 2 were younger than myself. 1 was a little bit older than myself, not much older. And all hadn't been vaccinated. And that's what we end up seeing a lot of. So it's, in my experience, has kind of shown out these numbers as well.
Right. Well, a lot of questions came in about safety with the vaccines. So Dr. Burnett, I'll start with you. How do you know these vaccines are safe?
This has got to be probably the most important question people are asking. And I thank you for asking it. Because quite honestly, I'm a person, I'm a father, I'm a husband before I'm a doctor. And so before I go and get a vaccine, and before I say to my kids who are old enough to make the decision, what about going for a vaccine? I want to make sure it's safe. And so looking at the research, looking how it's been done, I think we have been totally persuaded that this vaccine is worth the reason for taking it. So whenever you look at a vaccine, you have to look at what are the side effects and what's the consequences of not getting vaccinated. So the side effects we have in the main part, very minor, but the consequences of getting COVID, for me, who is an overweight diabetic, is quite high. And so it makes a no-brainer. But then when you look at the younger people, so like the over 18s, we've got good evidence. And actually, the people who are now in hospital and ICUs are tending to be 40-year-olds. So people of younger age are now getting COVID. And we know that the vaccine is effective in preventing them getting the disease. So how do we do that? So the whole process of getting a vaccine to market requires going through safety numbers. And this vaccine has had unprecedented cooperation, which has allowed us to get this vaccine through all the standards very quickly. It's not been rushed, it's not been fudged. It has been dealt in the same way as any other drug. And so I think we can be assured this is a safe medication. Now, every vaccine has side effects. We have to be right on that. Just to go off on a tangent slightly, I do travel health. So one of the vaccines we use is yellow fever, which is probably the most dangerous vaccine out there. Your chance of succumbing to a serious side effect in yellow fever is 1 in 100,000. If you're my age, it's 1 in 40,000. And However, if you're going to Central Africa, your chance of coming down with yellow fever is 1 in 10,000, with a 60% mortality rate. So nasty vaccine, horrible side effects. Now it is clearer, much clearer with this vaccine. We have a vaccine that is very safe versus COVID that is killing my friends. And so I think we can be very safe. We've got the studies, we've got the trials. These are trials that are open to people looking at. So you can actually look at the published trials and you can do the maths yourself. You can check your maths. It's not, and these have been what we call peer reviewed. So before it gets published in a journal, it has to go through a body of independent specialists who say, yep, we agree with these results. So you have a huge body of people coming forward. And as somebody had already mentioned, the majority of physicians, by a large percentage, have already got the vaccine. So this is a safe vaccine. Now, we talked about the short-term effects. So let's talk about long-term. So when you do a medication, normally you do the 3 phases. They come into the, and then there's a longer pre-release where you're looking for side effects. Then there's a longer when it's actually in the market, when you're looking for side effects that you have not found in the trials. And so a lot of medications, the average medication, only 1 out of 3 makes it past 2 years because of side effects that comes in post-market. And so we're used to that. Vaccines are totally different. The vaccine is out of your system within days, if not weeks. There is no known side effect that starts in a vaccine after 6 weeks. There's none. People talk about the MMR one with the guy who said that you can get autism from vaccines. That would have been the first, except he was a charlatan and was found out to misrepresented the facts because he was actually trying to sell his own vaccine. So you can be sure that after 6 weeks, we have had no history of a vaccine causing new effects. Now, you may get a side effect, Guillain-Barré, where you get a neuroparalysis, very, very rare, and you can actually get it with the vaccine, with the virus anyway. But that will last for a few months, but it starts before 6 weeks. So that 6 weeks that we do for every other drug is not an issue with this vaccine.
Perfect. So you've covered the short-term and the long-term. Thank you for that. Dr. Francois, several people asked how you know the vaccines are safe for children specifically. For example, please explain the efficacy, logic, and reasoning behind injecting children, the demographic that is least affected.
Yeah, that's a really great question. The same steps, the same hoops you have to jump through to ensure a vaccine is safe for adults, you need to jump through for kids, right? So the trials need to ensure the vaccine is safe, that it's effective. You need to be able to compare it. And then even after a vaccine's launch, there's a process of following up to look to see if there are effects in the long term for these vaccines. So it has had trials. So the Pfizer, which is indicated for ages 12 to 18, has undergone those trials. There are ongoing trials with other vaccines, including Moderna, which we anticipate there'll be some information coming out in the next week or so. We have also, after that's done, it isn't an automatic because you've done a trial that the vaccine gets indicated, it gets reviewed by Health Canada, which has a panel of experts to double check all of the statistics that manufacturers are putting. And then after that, you get groups of experts that sort of weigh in and provide advice around, if you have a vaccine, is it a good idea to administer or is it indicated? So in Canada, we have NACI, which is the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, which does some of that review around indications. And then we have national organizations, Canadian Pediatric Society in our country also sort of has groups of experts that look at it. So lots of people have eyes on this. The question around should we be vaccinating, why should we be vaccinating kids? It's true that adolescents are certainly not the highest risk in terms of COVID. The older you are, the other health illnesses that you may have, chronic diseases, will definitely increase your risk of getting really sick and dying from COVID. But kids can get COVID. Rarely they can also get pretty sick and land in a children's hospital. Not common. The biggest reason is probably around breaking the amount of virus that circulates in communities. So they aren't the biggest spreaders, but the kids can share viruses with other kids. And that may be more important as we get into variants. Especially our newer variants have affected younger adults more dramatically than previous versions of those viruses. So there's probably some value. We're fortunate in Canada and North America that we have good vaccine supply. So we are able to vaccinate a larger percent of the population, whereas other parts of the world probably really need to focus still on the highest risk people.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Barkman, Dr. Francois talked about the vaccination of children, and maybe just as a follow-up, this could be a quick answer. Doesn't the World Health Organization say we shouldn't be vaccinating children?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Michelle. And I like questions like that because it just shows that our people, our community, they like to be informed and they check on sources. And it's, it keeps us as doctors making sure that we're on top of things too, right? So I appreciate that kind of question. Now I have to say, as people may or may not know, lots of questions were submitted before. So I did know that there would be a question like this coming. So I wanted to look, because it's always a little bit hard. I don't want to speak for another organization because I don't work for the WHO. But so I looked up exactly what they said on their website. And I think that there has been some stuff they said in the past, but I've corrected as the science has moved on, right? Because initially there wasn't any studies with the children, and now it's kind of changed. So just if I can read this here, it does say on the WHO, they had said that, vaccinations, they talk about it. And then they say something about kids. And then it says, I quote, the WHO's Strategic Advisory Group of Experts has concluded that the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine is suitable for use by people aged 12 years and above. And then it does go on to say something to the effect, and I won't quote this part, but something to the effect that, you should do the highest risk people first. And that's, if we recall, that's what happened in Manitoba too, and the rest of Canada, where we started with the 90-year-olds, the personal care home, the healthcare workers, and we kind of moved our way down. So, and they also said after that, they're going to keep updating their policy as more evidence comes. So without being able to completely speak for them, it does seem like they're they have the whole world to go with, and we've been fortunate in Canada. I think we have one of the highest amount of vaccines in the world per capita. And so if you think the WHO is in charge of, they make recommendations for Africa, Asia, all over the world. So I think what they're trying to say with that is, obviously do the high risk people first, and we'll keep looking at the evidence for children. And it's actually I think a very small amount of the world that has enough vaccinations to even consider this at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Just a reminder that if we don't get through all of our questions today, please check manitobavaccine.ca, and there will be more follow-up there. But to get to our questions, let's keep on going. Dr. Burnett, I'll get you to start this one, and maybe some of the rest of you want to pitch in. Has Manitoba had any deaths because of the vaccine, and are these being swept under the rug?
So the answer to that is no, none that we are aware of. We doctors tend to be a fairly independent people, and we're not easily coerced. And in fact, as somebody who is a former administrator, trying to get doctors to move is very similar to herding cats. And so I don't think you could sweep anything under the rug. I have to say, though, that I think most of us have been very vigilant. I've actually put more reports about adverse outcomes or suspected adverse outcomes through than I have for any other product for many years. And that's just because we want to have all the information in front of the people who are making the decisions. And so I actually have had 2 deaths in the last, well, one was this week and one was 4 months ago that we did report because it happened quite quickly after the vaccine. Both cases, I was fairly certain this was not, but I wanted to be transparent. And both cases, the patient had very serious other problems, and it was that they succumbed to. But there is a process that we put in adverse events. And so that doesn't mean that their adverse event was caused by vaccine. So you can have a high number of reports because we're being very vigilant, but a very, very, very small, in fact, none that have been attributed to a death. And so I think we're definitely not sweeping it under the rug.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Krahn, you even had some personal experience as well in your practice on this, haven't you? Oh, you're muted.
Right. Thank you. Jayson, you're not the only one. I agree, Chris. We're not sweeping this one under the rug. We are actually very aware that that people are highly concerned, and we want to keep an eye on it. So, yeah, I was just going to say that I had someone die within 30 days of having a vaccine, and I looked at all of the details and with the family, and we were 100% sure it was not related to the vaccine. But these are the sort of things which sometimes pick up steam on their own. So-and-so died within a short period of time after having had the vaccine. Well, the fact is 55 million people around the world die every year. And because we've had 2.7 billion doses of vaccine given out in the last year, you know that there will be a large number of people who die after the vaccine, and it's not related to the vaccine.
Okay, thank you for that. This is a popular question, and I want to read the whole thing for you. Dr. Krahn, I'll get you to start us with this one. Several questions about claims from one scientist about the vaccine, whether spike proteins from the vaccine leave the injection site in the bloodstream and cause harm. For example, please respond to respected doctors and scientists that have serious concerns about not only the vaccine, but also the rejection of the scientific process for the last 12 plus months in the handling of this pandemic. Why is it that you folks are not publishing and speaking out about Dr. Bridle's information regarding the spike protein being bad for organs?
Okay, that's a very serious question. Mm-hmm. And I've heard lots of comments on that. I listened to it 3 times, so there's an interview on point, and I think that's the one that's being circulated. So I've listened to that, and I've also listened to a lot of other scientists and their rebuttal of it. So just a little bit of context here. When I heard it the first time, we were on our way to visit my son and daughter-in-law. I am very happy that she is pregnant. And we had this discussion about what do we do? Well, what's our advice to our daughter-in-law in terms of the vaccination? And this actually gave us second thoughts. But, you know, we have reviewed a lot of literature. We have reviewed a lot of stuff. And we said in the end, we think you should get the vaccine. And she has, and we're very happy about that. But there's the theory and there's the reality, and we just have to keep that in context, because what Dr. Bridle is talking about, and he has credentials, so he's one of the most credentialed people that I have heard who has offered a negative opinion on vaccines. He's a professor at the Ontario Veterinary College. He has funding himself to try and develop a vaccine, so he knows much of what he is talking about. What about all the other scientists who are disagreeing with him and are saying, we've read your arguments and we disagree with them? So I've read all those rebuttals, and they come down, I think, to this. In my mind, it comes down to there are some theories, and there are thousands of doctors around the world. The overwhelming majority of scientists do not agree with Dr. Bridle. And there are 2 reasons for it. The primary reason being he's doing a theoretical exposure of what he thinks is a big topic. and the reality is not borne out. In other words, all of these things that he is saying, these serious events that are going to happen, they're not happening in the real world. Or they're happening in numbers that we've known about for a while, that have been reported on, and there's no new information here, no new information whatsoever, but he certainly has made it quite sensational. So what do I mean when I say the reality does not bear out the theory? What I mean is there have been 2.7 billion doses of the vaccine given around the world, and these things that he is talking about are simply not happening. They are happening in ways that we knew of long before, the On Point interview with him. So we knew about the AstraZeneca vaccinations, and with blood clots, it could be as high as 16 blood clots per million people, which is actually a very small number. And the majority of those people didn't die, but many of them did. And we knew that was a big event. And unfortunately, it ended up with the AstraZeneca vaccine no longer being used frequently in Canada. And I think that was unfortunate, because I still think it's a very good vaccine. But we had also heard about the heart inflammation, the myocarditis and the pericarditis that has been happening. So that is being built up as a big thing, and it is a real event as far as we know. In Canada, we're not seeing higher numbers than we would have ordinarily seen. In other words, we look at the numbers of heart inflammatory conditions pre-vaccine, after people have been getting the vaccine, and we're not actually seeing that trend. But in Israel, they're seeing a trend. And so there may actually be an immune response, whether it's to the spike protein or something else, we're not sure, but the numbers are extraordinarily small. The benefit of the vaccine is extraordinarily great. And so the majority of scientists are saying there may be a little bit of truth to that, but it's mostly overblown, and it doesn't really reflect reality. And just a few other things about the actual things that he's saying. The spike protein gets out of the bloodstream, gets out of the cells into the bloodstream, accumulates in certain organs, and that's where it does its damage to the ovaries, risk of infertility, to the heart, to the brain. We're just not seeing those sorts of things, other than those small numbers of heart inflammation that I was talking about earlier. But it's probably only 1% of spike protein that actually gets into the bloodstream. It is there in infinitesimally small amounts. And so when he talks about the in vitro experiments where spike protein was toxic to cells, at about 100,000 times the level at which it is being found in the human body after vaccination. So I look at that and I say, I really don't think that's, like, I'm looking at it as a doctor, and I say that's not really relevant. I look at it as a practitioner who's probably had 800 patients in my practice who've been vaccinated. I'm not seeing the sort of things that he's talking about. I see people who have serious adverse reactions, but they're exactly the ones that have been reported by the WHO and the CDC and Health Canada for months already. So I'm not seeing any new information here. The other thing about the claim, and that is this: if those spike proteins are so bad, then what happens to people who are actually getting the disease? Because the number of spike proteins that you get when you get the disease would be astronomical compared to the number that are floating around in your system after the vaccination. So my concern is not that these spike proteins may be dangerous in these tiny amounts that you get from a vaccine. My concern is there are millions of people around the world dying of COVID-19 because they could not get the vaccine. That's my concern. So should we look at this seriously? Yeah, we should look at all of these things seriously. We should take all scientists, and we really need to respect the scientists' right to speak their mind. If they think they're seeing something, they should say that. We shouldn't squash it, and we're not squashing it.
Awesome.
But I look at it as a practitioner, and I don't think that there is much merit to it.
Yeah, very much appreciate you giving validity to the question, though, because it has been asked by a lot of people, and a lot of people are hearing that information. And Dr. Krahn, maybe just quickly, you mentioned pregnancy already and the vaccine. What about breastfeeding mothers? The question has come in if it's safe to get the vaccine. Are there studies completed on breastfeeding women and the COVID-19 vaccine specifically? And what are the impacts on the infant being breastfed?
Very good question. I get asked that as well. And the answer is yes, it is safe. And yes, we have done studies. And yes, the studies are showing that there is almost no spike protein vaccine or anything like that getting into the breast milk. So we think that it is very safe. But the other thing to know is that antibodies do pass through to the baby. So the baby is actually getting antibodies, not getting the vaccine, not getting the spike protein, but is getting the antibodies. So we think there's actually a net benefit. And if I can talk just a little further to the topic of fertility. So there's a concern about infertility, and Dr. Bridle also mentions concern about infertility. Is this an issue or not? There's not a lot of research yet because it is so new. However, all of the early data shows that there is no effect on fertility. All of the data shows that there's no effect on either male or female fertility. So I think we can say that it's very safe, and most of us are starting to recommend it to our pregnant patients already. You can get the COVID vaccine, and you
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you for addressing those, because I've heard those just in regular everyday conversation, the infertility and being a woman and having friends, some of that breastfeeding topic has come up. So thank you for that. Just a reminder to everyone watching tonight that you can get up-to-date information about COVID-19 at manitobavaccine.ca. And I think it's really important for you to know that this site is independent from the government's COVID website, and it's created and maintained by our Manitoba physicians. So just keep that in mind if you want to look further. And we may even go a little past 7:30. If you're watching now, you're like, oh, get to my question. We're going to do our best to do that. And we may just sneak, into Dr. Burnett's supper time to do that. So he has said he's willing to do that. We're going to move on to vaccine development. There's been a bunch of questions on how this thing was developed. Dr. Barkman, I'll start with you. How are these vaccines developed so quickly? And how could they come up with a vaccine for this in under a year?
An excellent question. And as Michelle said, some of these things, we have 1 hour to talk about these topics that probably take an hour each. So I encourage you, we'll try and answer the best we can, but always, talk to your doctor or go to the website that Michelle's referenced a few times. So I'll try and do this one fairly quick. But when COVID came out about a year ago, just over, that was one of my same concerns. Vaccines haven't taken, we've never developed a vaccine within a year. And so what are the chances? And I was, I don't know if negative about it, but I was pretty skeptical that we could do this. But it is amazing what's happened. And part of that is funding. Every research trial, there costs money, right? And so we've had kind of a world of, the whole world's been concerned. So there's been a lot of funding in this area. And then there's a lot of cooperation among the different organizations and countries and such. And then I think Dr. Burnett spoke to this. So it's not that they skip corners, but they've also been pushed to the front of the line. So sometimes with different approvals and stuff, they didn't, go back and say, well, we'll look at these 3 drugs and then you can come along. They were skipped to the front of the line because we're in a crisis, right? So some of those things make it more expedited, and just the amount of people working on it, I don't know, like I said before, I think 100 different vaccines are out there. So, some of them haven't made it and some of them have been kind of discarded. So that's science, where there's so many people trying different angles. We talked a lot about mRNA, but there's lots of different people looking for this type of vaccine and that type of vaccine. And some of the research was built on other research that we already had, and we had, the SARS a few years ago, and so these things have kind of been in the system. So it's multifactorial for sure, and it takes a longer conversation to say why it came so quickly. But I think a lot of the collaboration and the crisis of it was the main reason.
Yeah. Unprecedented is what, some of us heard how many were working together on this around the world. Next question that came with that, aren't these vaccines still experimental, and aren't they authorized under an emergency order, Dr. Barkman?
This is another question I've heard, and I love these questions. And partially I love these questions because this is stuff that we've dealt with as doctors for, forever. It's just no one's asked us these questions in the past. like lots of times we use drugs that are quote unquote off label, and that's not quite the same thing. But you look at approvals, you look at the science, and you do what's best for the patient based on risk benefit. So the emergency question isn't actually a Canadian question. That's more of an American question, the FDA. So our term here in Canada is interim, I think, approval. And interim doesn't mean it's not safe or they didn't do their due diligence. It's just that they, again, like I kind of alluded to, they bump to the front of the line. But there's also, it's actually good for the population because the Health Canada said, yes, we'll approve you. We think this is very safe, but you have to do this, you have to do that, like, and you have to follow it. And there's lots of rules that they have to follow. And part of that helps our safety, right? So we got data. And the other thing is, I've heard people say this too, well, I'm not going to take a vaccine until it's not an emergency or it's not in the interim. Most people don't know the term interim, but I think that's what they mean. But this is a COVID crisis pandemic, right? So this isn't something that we could study for 5 years and then give you a 5-year data, right? So there's been big studies, there's safe studies or safety studies, and it's been very promising. And do we know everything? No. But so far, we're very convinced that it's safer than getting COVID for sure.
Yeah. So then just to follow up, if with all of the, even just being bumped up, it doesn't mean that these vaccines are experimental then. They've gone past that point, correct?
Yeah, again, like I don't actually like the term that they use in the FDA, and I'm not an American, so I can't tell them what to do. So I like the term we're using better in Health Canada. So experimental to me, it does have this connotation of, oh, I'm being experimented on, right? And yeah, like we don't want to be experimented on. We don't want to be, as a population, that sounds scary, right? Now there's people that sign up voluntarily for experiments, and that, we gotta love those people that sign up for the experiments. I think 40,000 people sign up for the Pfizer experiment alone. That's never mind the Moderna and all the other vaccines around the world. So these 40,000 people sign up for a promising drug, but there's no guarantee that it was safe, it wasn't safe, it worked, it didn't work. So these people voluntarily stood up. So, I don't know who these people are, they're confidential, but if I could, shake their hand, thanks for doing that. But as we all know, this is a conversation we're having right now, and I appreciate everyone out there listening to this conversation, because we're not out there to tell you what to do. This is your choice in the end. And the same thing, no one's going to force you to get a vaccine in Manitoba or Canada. Manitoba is where we are. This is your choice, but we want to try and give you the most informed choice you have. And I think sometimes people have even said like they feel coerced or pressured. And I think we as doctors, we're so passionate about this because, personally, I've seen it in ICU. I've seen it in the ER where people come in and they're air hungry and they're short of breath and, their oxygen levels are very low. And, and unfortunately, sometimes I'm the last one they talk to, right? Because I'm sending them off to ICU and some come back, not all of them come back, right? And that's like the news only reports deaths, right? And never mind all the people that have long-term symptoms or even those that are sick for 2 weeks with just horrible aches and pains. And, there's a lot of things you don't hear about, or they're just very short of breath. And there's lots of people we send home that don't go to ICU and they're very sick. So maybe I'm getting off topic here a bit, but yeah, I would in no means would call this an experimental thing, because I think that's misleading a bit. But again, like I've alluded to, I can't really speak for the FDA.
For sure. It's okay. I think you didn't necessarily get off topic. You just showed us once again that we aren't just talking to you guys, don't have an agenda. You're humans who see it firsthand, and you care about us Manitobans, which is exactly why you're giving your time tonight. That's what I think you showed us right there. So thank you for that. Dr. Burnett, what are the ingredients in the vaccine?
Okay, I think first of all, probably what's not in the vaccine. So there are no aborted cell lines used in making these vaccines. That's very important. There are cell lines, but they're not from aborted fetuses. One product that can cause is PEG, polyethylene glycol. There's a very rare allergy to that. I've never seen it. There are no nuts, seafood, or other food allergies. So if you've got somebody who's got a food allergy who's taking an EpiPen, certainly take the EpiPen along when you get the injection, but it is very unlikely that there is actually nothing in there that you're going to react to. Now, what is in there? So here, you've already mentioned ManitobaVaccine.ca. That is we doctors use it as well. And so there is a good list of all the ingredients in there. But just for an example, looking at the Pfizer vaccine. So obviously, the main ingredient is this messenger RNA. Then there's lipid, and that's that polyethylene glycol. There's salt, potassium chloride, or table salt, sodium chloride. There's sugar, basic table sugar. So don't worry if you're a diabetic, it's not that much. And there's also sucrose, and there's water. That's it. And there's some different mixes of that for all three of the ones. And I would ask our listeners to check it out. That is a good resource that shows you that. But I think it's important that if you have got an allergy, you mention it to the person who's going to give you the vaccine. You take along your EpiPen with you, but it is very unlikely that your current allergy is going to be a contraindication. But please ask, please make it known to the people when you go there.
Perfect. Dr. Burnett, this question has come in from the chat, and it's a popular one. And one of the questions we had earlier, and I'll tie it to the one from the chat because it's covering the same thing. The one we received earlier says, why aren't doctors open to other drugs to treat or prevent COVID, like ivermectin? And then from the chat, it says the same. Why isn't there any interest in treatment, not just prevention? Ivermectin, I can't say all these words. Hydroxychloroquine, how's that? Vitamin D. These seem to have good responses as treatment in other places around the world.
Okay, good question. And I have to say, personally, if I had a good treatment that I could give in my office to COVID-19 sufferers, I would be using it. And so the process we get to there, and I think this is difficult to understand. And one of the things about this whole process is for the last 18 months, we have been on a very steep learning curve. What we knew 18 months ago and if we'd had this conversation 18 months ago, our responses would have been a lot more vaguer and a lot less probably frightening, actually, with what we didn't know then and we know now, and also humbly what we might know tomorrow that disagrees. So we are looking, and these ones that you mentioned have been investigated and are being investigated. So let's take the hydroxychloroquine. So that seemed to be very popular with a friend to the south of us, and was studied. We actually found an adverse number of deaths linked to it. And so it was studied and then put aside. Ivermectin has had a small number of studies out there. This is a drug I've known, I used it in Africa. We had onchocercosis, river blindness in our area, and that was a drug that we used to use for that. It works very well against filarials, works well against another parasite called strongyloides, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So yeah, this is a drug that has had some fairly small studies that are mixed. So some of the studies show some improvement, and some studies don't. And yes, we've had studies for prevention and studies for treatment. There's less also prevention. There's also been some deaths, and unfortunately, some people have found that they can get ivermectin from their vet for their dog, and have repurposed it for humans. And with some very bad effects, we've had some kidney failures linked to it. The problem, what we found so far, is that the evidence for it is at very high doses, and we're not quite sure how safe that is. And there is a study going on in Canada at the moment. There's not a great point in going into your family doc and asking for ivermectin. I've had a few people, partly because it's what's called a special access drug. It can only really be prescribed at the moment, either outside of the trial. It can only really be prescribed by an infectious diseases doctor literally for strongyloides, which is an invasion of your body by this small worm. And for a few other things. In the States, it is more widely infected. In the States, it's been used for head lice. I'm not sure why it isn't more widely affected in Canada, but it isn't. And so it's a non-starter until we get the science. And I'm hoping that science is going to be out soon. And so you have to
We've lost your sound a little bit there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're back, I think.
Back again?
Yep.
My apologies. How far back did I go?
It was just like half a sentence.
Okay, sorry about that. So let me know if I cut out again and I'll have to change.
Okay.
Oh, has that changed again?
Now you're back even louder. Yeah.
Okay, good. Listen, so we're concerned for patient safety. That's our fundamental. So before we use a drug, it has to be shown to be beneficial for that person. That's what we've been talking about the vaccine, and we haven't yet got that evidence for ivermectin. So let's go back to our cousin strongyloides very quickly. So I was on an international conference recently. It was supposed to be in Jakarta. We all did it by Zoom. And an infectious diseases physician from Delhi was saying, yes, we give ivermectin to everyone who comes into our hospital. And so we all got up and said, okay, what's going on here? And then she said, because of strongyloides. So strongyloides is a worm that stays inside our stomach. One of the treatments that we have found is very effective is dexamethasone. If you give dexamethasone to a person who's got strongyloides in the stomach, they may never know about it. There's no symptoms from it, but suddenly these strongyloides decide to go walkabout throughout the body, and they take with them the gut bacteria with them, and so they cause a massive septicemia, and it's very, very common to have death from it. So a lot of the studies on ivermectin has been done in that geographic area where we find strongyloides. So the thought is, it's what we call a confounding factor. Is there a factor in there that we're not yet aware of that makes it seem to work, but it's actually not? And so this will all come out, but I sat up and pricked up because that explains why the studies from Guatemala, studies from South Africa, where strongyloides are very common, might affect it, because if we get rid of the strongyloides, you're not going to have the side effects of the dexamethasone, and it will do its work. Now, we'll have to wait for the science to come out to back up that, but that was our consensus from these experts from India.
Yeah.
So we have to wait and see. We did do it with dexamethasone, and dexamethasone is being found to be effective. Ivermectin, let's wait for the study and see.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. It really, even the geography of that helps us understand what is actually relevant to us here in Manitoba and in Canada. And I want to point out that the question was worded, why aren't doctors open to other drugs? You answered that right away in saying there are studies being done. And if we find that, and when, if science shows that, you are open to drugs that will work, and you will not want to do that to your patients if you don't know that. Dr. Barkman, you had something to add?
Yes, I just want to add a little bit too, because this is a question I've heard too. And I mean, I would love it if they had a study showing that ivermectin works, and I would be completely open to it. So there's two things I wanted to add, well, maybe three. Like ivermectin is an anti-parasitic, and sometimes drugs do work on a few different things. It's not an antiviral. That's something that people have to understand. Doesn't mean we shouldn't study it, because sometimes this drug might work there. The second thing is, like, again, I alluded to that I do some more critical care, and dexamethasone is something we use. We use treatment. There is treatment we use. It's not like we don't do anything. But dexamethasone has been found, if you give too early, you have worse outcomes. But if you give it once they actually have low in oxygen, then you have better outcomes. So we're trying to be careful not to give something that makes things worse, right? So, and it's complicated to say that, because people are saying, well, there's promising in this country or that country, but there's many times when you study a drug and you actually make someone worse. So, we want to be careful, because this has happened, and I think someone else said that 1 out of 3 drugs make it past the first or second phase of trials. And so lots of these are promising for whatever reason, and then it doesn't pan out. So if I had some indication that ivermectin worked, I mean, I would use it. I had no problem with using it. Dexamethasone, when the trials came out, absolutely no problem. So I'm not against it. Although I do find it interesting. I do find, I've always been into more preventative health, because I do, like I say, we do try and treat things when they're there. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a good diet. Like, that's preventative health, good diet, exercise, and we should still be doing these things to keep your body strong. And it's not the same a vaccine, but something, if you can prevent a disease, I've always thought is better than getting the disease. So does that mean we're against treatment? Absolutely not. I mean, I gave treatment, like I said, to 3 people in this last week, and we gave maximum treatment that we had. Again, I always think preventative is better. It doesn't mean we shouldn't look into treatment with the process as described.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for adding that. Dr. Francois, this is, I think, a very important question. Are physicians being censored or muzzled in any way about COVID or alternative treatments? And are you being paid to promote or push the vaccine?
Good question. Physicians by nature are a vocal group. We express our opinions. You can read the Free Press and you can see the diversity of opinions within our physician community about, are we going far enough or not far enough? Are we taking this seriously or not seriously enough? So by nature, I think physicians do express their thoughts quite openly. They're also quite drawn by evidence, right? They want to know what the best practice, and beyond sort of the public discourse, there's a lot of internal discourse. So if you talk to emergency physicians or ICU physicians, they are talking to their colleagues across the country about, what are you doing in your center, and what have you found that's worked, what's a promising new approach to something. And so there's this dynamic sort of exchange between providers. I don't think there's anyone sort of being shut out or being discouraged from expressing opinion. So we're quite, as a curious nature, we're quite open on this. Second part of that, are we getting paid? No. We're taking our time to speak to you as part of our professional work. We care a lot about our patients. I've spent lots and lots of time talking to patients, phoning patients at the end of the day without compensation for that. I have no affiliations with any pharmaceutical manufacturer or vaccine manufacturer.
Thank you for that.
Or do I? I don't. Right. I know everybody in this panel, and I know nobody here is being censored in any way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. Dr. Barkman, are the vaccines effective against the variants? People want to know.
Yeah, I mean, variants come up, right, as we've seen over the last little while. You'll have different variants coming up, and there's risks of more variants coming up. So this is one of those questions I can only answer for now. And so far, we've been fortunate that the vaccines we are using are quite effective against the variants. And I hope that we get, a good vaccination rate so we can, get rid of the virus so that we don't have it keep coming back and making new variants. But can I promise that for the future? Obviously not. But so far it's very promising.
Perfect.
Can I just add something?
Yep.
The new mRNA vaccines, because they're sort of plug and play, if you get a variant that is resistant to the present vaccine, you can actually do a small tweak on the vaccine, get a different vaccine, and it will now be effective against the variant. So that's the beauty of the new vaccines.
Perfect. Dr. Francois, on the whole vaccine thing, is it okay to mix and match vaccines, like get an mRNA vaccine after AstraZeneca or get Moderna after Pfizer?
Getting lots and lots of those questions from patients just because of changes of availability, especially in the last few weeks. So what we do know, certainly if Pfizer and Moderna, both mRNA vaccines, very similar effectivity. And if good studies looking at swapping out. So if you got Pfizer first and you get Moderna, you're going to still get a great effect. Similar, if you got Moderna first and you only have Pfizer available, you're still going to get the desired effect. So after your second dose, you should hit 95% protection after that second dose. So really, really encouraging that sense. Second sub-question about those people who got AstraZeneca. And again, because we're shying away from using AstraZeneca in Canada, we've been focusing more attention on Moderna and Pfizer. Good studies, again, looking at the mixing and matching of that viral vector and that mRNA vaccine. And we actually get good response from AstraZeneca and then either Moderna or Pfizer, you're still going to get a good immune response. And this is not surprising. We've been doing some of this with other vaccines. So hepatitis vaccine is a great example. You'll have one brand of hepatitis vaccine, and that second dose, if you use the other brand, you're going to get a good response.
Okay. The next question that was, what is the best interval between doses? For AstraZeneca, what happens if I am past the 12-week interval?
So for Pfizer, we've said minimum 21 days, 28 days is what the province has been recommending. Moderna, similarly, 28 days after your first to get your second dose. AstraZeneca, the recommendations was if you're getting another dose of AstraZeneca, we were saying 8 to 12 weeks was the preferred sort of length. With the combo, again, we say 4 weeks minimum. Ideally, if you can wait 8 to 12 weeks, you actually get a little more protection if you wait a few extra weeks with the AstraZeneca and the mRNA combo.
Okay, thank you for that. A couple more questions that we're going to cover tonight. And a reminder, if we don't get to the questions that you want answered, check manitobavaccine.ca. There's going to be follow-up there. There will also be physicians that are continually adding, a panel of physicians adding more answers to common questions. Again, that's manitobavaccine.ca. Dr. Burnett, I'm going to come to you for this one. What is the level of vaccine uptake in Southern Manitoba and in Steinbach?
Okay, I've changed my sound, so I hope you can hear me with this.
Perfect.
So as of, I think this is this week, total across Manitoba, 71% of people have received the first dose. Steinbach, you're at 49%. Hanover area is 36. St. Anne is 51. St. Pierre, Salaberry, 67. And there's a place called Niverville, and it's at 70%.
Oh.
To break that down into what it means, you go into your favorite store in Steinbach, not wearing a mask, and you have got 50% of people in that store who have got protection, and a 50% of people that if one of them has got COVID, they can pass it along those 50. So the chances of that person coming across somebody who has not been vaccinated and passing on COVID is much higher. Now, if it was 70%, I'm only working in 30% of people that I have to wander around the store to find somebody. So the higher we get that number, the less chance we can transmit viruses onto each other.
Perfect. Thank you for those numbers and current as well. And Dr. Barkman and whoever else wants to pitch in, this is our final question that came in earlier. Aren't the vaccine cards and privileges for fully vaccinated people unfair and creating a two-tier society?
Yeah, I think you're asking me the difficult questions here, Michelle. That's a difficult question because I think I'm stealing this from someone, but it's kind of this cross of medicine and politics. And I mean, as a physician, I would try and do what's best for my patient, and I want to do medicine, and I'm not really into politics as much. So, I have looked at that. I have a family and everything, and I have people that have asked me these questions, and I'm not sure. I don't know if I have a medical answer for it. I guess my one thought was that I've worked in Africa a little bit, not a lot, but this kind of thing will be taken out of our hands anyways, because every country may make their own rules. So I think yellow fever was a reference before, and I wasn't allowed to go to this particular country in Africa unless I got my yellow fever vaccine. And, now I know different people have different opinions about that, and that's fine. But I know at the time I didn't mind. Like, I'm like, they want to protect their citizens from me, and they want to protect me from the diseases that are there. And so I took it. And I think Dr. Burnett made a good explanation that yellow fever is one of the more dangerous vaccines out there. Very safe, but still one of the dangerous ones. So I took it. I didn't think too much of it. Everyone in my trip took it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be let in. So I know that that's where we may be going. I in no way agree to a two-tier society. Obviously, we all want to treat our patients and our neighbors and our friends the same. And you know what? It's the same thing that we're doing here. We're having a conversation. And I love it. But it's your choice in the end what you do. And that doesn't make me look at you different. You're still a human being. You're part of my community, or you're not. I don't know how far reaching this podcast is or YouTube. But I look at you no different. I don't think we should have a too serious society. But there may be temporary, or maybe some countries will do it permanent where you have to get vaccinated. I don't know how to predict that.
Yeah, I do. And Dr. Krahn, you and I chatted earlier. I happened to be on the morning show that I host, and you were gracious enough to join me, and you shared with us, and maybe it'd be relevant as we wrap this up tonight, your hopes for what we have just done and what we have all talked about, and all the questions that came forward, and the four of you doctors and your generosity of your time and why you did this, what your hopes were for this panel.
I love this sort of event, and I'm very happy to do it with the co-participants. And thank you very much, Michelle. You've done an awesome job. At the end of the day, we're going to get through this pandemic, and we're going to get through it with high numbers or low numbers. We're going to get through it with Steinbach looking good in terms of vaccination to the rest of the country, or not looking so good. But in the end, we as a community really need to be kind to each other. At the end of the day, I'm still going to have to talk to all of my patients who chose not to get the vaccine. I will treat them no differently. We are going to, as physicians, guarantee that we will look after you no matter what. We will not look down on you. And that's what we're asking of the community. Please don't look down on those who choose not to get the vaccine. We're strongly encouraging it. We think the reasons for getting the vaccine far outweigh any risks that there are out there. And one more plea that I would have for those who think they don't want to get it for themselves, I would ask on behalf of my cancer patients, many of whom are going to have reduced immunity, many of whom will try to get the vaccine, but they're not going to be able to fit it in between their treatments. And so there are some very, very vulnerable people out there. And if you choose, if our evidence has been convincing that it's safe enough, but you just don't want to do it because of personal reasons, or you don't have the time, I'm going to ask you, please take the time, because there are a lot of vulnerable people out there who need you to take the time. We won't think any less of you if you don't get the vaccine, but I think there's a strong reason why we as a community would like to see everyone vaccinated.
Well, Dr. Burnett, Dr. Francois, Dr. Barkman, Dr. Krahn, I might, on behalf of the communities listening, thank you. And I would go back as far as saying, thank you for the time that you individuals, along with all of your co-doctors that have put in the study that you've done in your life to learn these things, for the time you've spent on the front line, talking about seeing actual COVID patients in critical care. Most of us haven't seen that. So we trust you on that. And thank you for being our trusted resources for this knowledge. And what I've heard tonight is real concern, real humans having concern for those that they speak to every day. This isn't an agenda. This isn't something that you will gain from, except that in knowing that if you've given a few of the right words tonight, maybe you have gained a couple of more people that will say, you know what, I'm going to get the vaccine because they showed true concern and they have no reason to do it except for their care for me. And I think that is absolutely huge. And you know what, you heard, you listening right now, you heard not only doctors and their knowledge, but you heard fathers, sons, and people in our community that care about us. And if that doesn't convince you, it'd be pretty hard to convince you of anything. So thank you, doctors, for what you do every day, and for what you've done here tonight. Again, please go and visit manitobavaccine.ca if you have any more questions. If you want to look into some of the details, you can watch this again later, I'm told, right there, manitobavaccine.ca. This has been recorded, and please pass it on to someone you know who might need to hear it, who didn't hear it tonight. So on behalf of Doctors Manitoba, I'm Michelle Sawatzky. And again, thank you to our panel, and thank you so much for listening. Good night.